Alright, hi everybody. I'm Warlord Magni, and thank you for being here for my Newb to Warlord series. Whatever you do, just make sure you don't stand in front of the camera. Today's class is on combat assessment and strategy. So, really what this class is about is being able to gather information during a fight or at the start of a fight, and then building your offense and defensive plan to hopefully win. All right. So first off, you need to be able to gather information, and the way that you do that is by reading, typically. So, Sean, if you go up into a stance, right? If I'm going to be coming into a fight, I need to read and be able to decipher different aspects about my opponent, right? So I want to be looking at their stance, right? What foot is forward? What is their body position? What parts of their body are closer to me and further away? Um, Also, what is their guard placement like? Okay. Sean right now has a standard guard, but it's a little bit lower. So even in this position, it's actually really easy for me to get that arm slot, whereas if Sean's guard was up, it's more protected, and if I want to get that that forearm, I have to reach around for it more. Okay. Body placement is really important. How far back are your opponent's hips? What equipment they have. With single sword, this is pretty straightforward. You don't have that much of a variation. But if, for example, you're going sword and board, this is where things become really interesting, right? I'm using a punch shield, and Sean is using a dome shield, which is also a strap. So the types of shots that Sean is going to have available to himself is going to be very different than the types of shots that I'll have available, right? Since I have a punch shield, I have all of this motion to go around. Whereas Sean, you do it. Sean can't go as far, right? I can do this, right? Whereas Sean is really stuck in the rigidity of how far he can go over, and that's because he has a strap. Additionally, with the dome shield, Sean, can you turn this way more? So dome shields typically will lip on the shoulder, so it's going to be harder for me to get this shoulder slot compared to if I have a punch shield, right? Because it's not lipping over my shoulder. Additionally, since it's a strap, it's going to be harder to move. So if you go over there, right? If I throw like this, all of the force is going to come down into the shoulder. It's never going to wrap around. If I want to get that shoulder, I have to like come over, and I'm actually really going for the back or for the butt. Whereas, Sean, if you go for my shoulder, if Sean hits the board hard enough, it'll actually push my shield down, right? So that's a big variation in the type of equipment and what information you can get out of that. Okay. Additionally, when you're reading your opponent, you want to kind of look for any easy openings. When you fight higher tier fighters, there's going to be less to be able to find, but earlier fighters, it's really common for people to chicken wing, right? So if somebody's chicken winging, I don't have to try really hard. I can get that double tap, get an easy win. If you're fighting in like a kingdom level tournament and you're doing pits, look for the easy kills, right? You don't want to burn a lot of energy when you have a long endurance fight. So try to find the easy kills and use that strategy. Additionally, one thing that I want to talk about and just make sure everybody is aware of when looking or reading is some people, especially in single sword, I've started to do this now where I will actually put my non-sword foot forward, right? So this is really important when it comes to any single sword or like sword and board fighting, whatever foot you have forward, this is actually going to affect your range. So just come this way a little bit. Right. So my range right here, just drop your guard. Right. Now, right here is when I'm able to touch Sean. But if I flip my stance, all I'm going to do is just switch my hip forward. And I'm now getting about 4 to 6 inches off of that. Right. So sometimes what you can come across an opponent in a fight, you start out here. One, my shoulder is pointed forward, so a lot of people are going to see this as a bait. Well, they may not recognize it as bait, but ooh, it's nice and juicy. That's a kill. Okay, so people will come in closer to get that. Boom, and all I'm doing is just throwing a hip switching, to get them to come closer into my strike range, and also when people realize that your range is further away, they feel safer, right? So this is reading, as well as you can now take aspects about this and implement it into your own game, but also be conscious about the traps that other people can play. Okay, so again, the things you want to look for is the stance, the guard, body placement, where their feet are, where their hips are, where their shoulders are, how they're moving, right? A lot of fights when you're fighting aren't stagnant. Typically people are rotating and trying to figure out their opponent. If any of you just paid attention, the way that I'm circling is very different than the way Sean is circling. I'm doing these different, I'm doing full steps, where Sean will move his front foot and then he's almost dragging his back foot, right? And so that can tell you about their footwork. When you're dragging your foot across the ground, that's more friction, it's less mobile. And if I can get Sean on that movement step and push in, his foot now has to come off the ground to come back, right? There's more ability for him to get caught and get caught off foot, or off balance. There we go. Right, so paying attention to the movement and looking for any easy openings. This is all in a relatively stagnant environment that I'm talking about. So now you have to think about things in a dynamic environment. This is what a fight is really about. So how do you do this? And so really what you need to do is you need to use a series of different probing techniques. So looking at openers. So what an opener is you're typically throwing a safe shot at your opponent that slightly threatens them. You're not really trying to hit them, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to see how they respond. So if I just throw at this hand, and I'm not really threatening Sean from this shot, but how is Sean going to respond? If I throw and Sean just blocks it, that means Sean's probably more of a defensive fighter, and I most likely am going to have free reign, at least one free shot. Okay? But if instead I throw and Sean throws, right, I now just got my arm tagged. Ideally, you don't want to get hurt or get injured on the opener. But if Sean throws immediately, okay, I know that I have to be more strategic and play, a safer game. Using your openers at different spots. You don't always want to throw at that hand. Sometimes throwing, this cross shot towards the body. When you do these openers, you really want to have a defensive plan in place, right? So with this underhand shot at this angle, I've already pretty much blocked off a lot of the lane from Sean, right? So, if he's going to return, he doesn't have a lot of options in getting my body, okay? Additionally, you can throw fakes and pumps, right? A pump is where you just throw a partial shot. You're not actually throwing all the way. How do they respond to that? Is it instinctually into this deep guard? How much do they buy into it? Or are they going to throw right away off of that? Right? So you're really probing how offensive and how defensive your opponent is. Doing body jukes, right? This is really getting more into the fakes, right? You throw your body into a shot, but you're not really throwing the shot. So you're seeing how they respond to your body mechanics versus just your sword, right? So what I can do is I can throw like this. Does Sean move towards with my body, or does Sean stay in place, right? Okay, Sean didn't move, so maybe he's not going to fall for my fakes as well. But on top of that, if I know that, I can throw like that. That would be more for the case that Sean moves his equipment. But instead, from here, I now have a bunch of access to Sean's side, so I can come in, right? So that's your jukes, your lunges, your fakes, your pumps. Also, how do they respond to stepping in, stepping out, right? So often, you're commonly circling in these fights, and if I encroach, does Sean stay in place? Does he back out? Every once in a while, you'll get somebody real funky, and they'll actually step in. Some people really like to fight in A range, right? If you know about yourself, you like to fight in A range. Oh, that may be something really good for you. A lot of Amtgard fighters don't like fighting in A range. So being conscientious about, okay, this person is really really aggressive and wants to be in that space and they can dominate it. So you need to be on your guard to make sure you don't step in or you don't let them get there. Okay? And you can do a variety of different steps. You can, just take a single step in. You can be out here and lunge in and see what happens. Or, stutter step to see how they respond. To see how they respond to each of those stimuli. And so really what you're trying to do in an abstract sense is you're trying to build a model, right? You're getting data about how your opponent responds, and you want to build a model that can predict that behavior, and then you know how to capitalize on their openings. Does that make sense? Okay. And so, right, you use reading, you use these probing methods, and then the last piece of information to assess your combat is prior knowledge about your opponent, right? Pretty much after you fought a while, in LARP, you come across the same people again and again and again. Every once in a while, you'll come across somebody new where you now have to fully rely on those first two steps. But you have prior data already. And so you use that data to help inform your strategy, right? So I've fought with Sean extensively over the last 6 months, right? So I know how aggressive Sean is for the most part. I know a lot of Sean's setups, a lot of, Sean's movement capabilities, whether or not Sean plays a range game, right? These are sort of the things that you need to think about in building your strategy, and about your opponent. What the setups are, how fast their hand speed is, how fast their movement is, how fast their body is, right? Does your opponent do a lot of level changes? How does that change what is accessible to you and accessible to them? And how does that change your defense strategy? How responsive are they to your shots? What is their timing like? Some people have really, really goofy timing, right? When you get to a lot of these high level fights, it's boom, 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 boom. But some people have really good timing skills, which I don't have the ability to change time, where it'll go boom, 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 huh, boom. And I'll go for a block waiting for a shot. That shot's not there, but since I'm zoned in, I'll go for the shot and then they'll counter me. So if somebody can do that, you have to be more conscientious of it. How good are they at their fakes and their baits, and their feints? How much are you buying into those, and how well do they sell them? For example, I've talked about Warlord Nip on this series a decent amount, and he throws some amazing fakes. And when I was on my climb, man, would I eat them up. I would eat them up so much. But eventually I had to learn, and I built enough data on it of how to counteract those fakes, and how not to fall into them as much. Okay? So those are your three big pieces of information, or broad categories. The stagnant reading, the dynamic probing, and then past history. Okay? And then for the past history, check out my adaptation video on YouTube. It really tells you how to change over a series of fights and how to adapt your strategy. But now with this information, how do we build a strategy in the first place? All right. So you know all this information. I know how Sean's going to respond, or I can at least predict it for the most part. Reasonable confidence. You can never be 100% sure here. But it's important for you to remember what your strengths and what your weaknesses are. Capitalize on your strengths, right? How do you use your strengths to exploit your opponent's weaknesses? And then knowing your opponent's strengths, how do you mitigate that? Or how do you mitigate your weaknesses from being capitalized by your opponent? Okay. And then obviously once you get this plan, you need to be able to execute it, but also have in mind some backup strategies. Okay. So I'm just going to go through now an example of single sword in terms of planning. Sean and I will do a couple of fights, and I'll walk you through in sort of my assessment process. Okay. And then the strategy that I build off of that. All right. So Sean and I will come into this fight. So right now I'm looking at Sean, and again, like I said, Sean's dragging that back foot. So that means if I push while we're rotating, Sean probably isn't going to be able to back off that well. So I use my movement a lot. So I'm going to capitalize on my movement to exploit Sean's less able footwork. Okay? I'm sorry? Yes. Yes, yes. So using the timing of the movement, yeah. Yeah, I was just saying it for the camera, or for the audio. Yeah. Okay. So using that footwork, also Sean's guard is a little low, right? So, and that could be a great shot location. Sean's front shoulder or sword side shoulder is exposed to me, so that's going to be the closest thing for me to hit, but that's also where his sword is, so that's probably going to be his best guard. Now that, as I've talked to him, he's slowly raised his guard. I don't know if anybody noticed this. So now that's exposing his torso to me, right? So you can't change. So, in this scenario, I would be thinking about, all right, I'm going to throw a shot. I'm going to move in on a sidestep, and I could do this part step, or just one step in. But I personally like to do a deep lunge and a level change on that. Again, not everybody can do this. So, again, use what is available to you. Don't hurt yourself. So I'll step in. Okay, now I have access to a stab. I have access to that shoulder slot. Or I can access this hip. But since I know that, since that sword is down, I'm actually going to throw a combination where I'll come boom. Maybe I hit it. And if I get Sean to rotate, okay, that's great. I now have all of this access in. Maybe I miss. Boom, stab, or hit. Or, I have a couple of good options to plan off of that. Maybe now, for example, I don't know Sean that well, right? Totally new person. So here I am, be rotating. All right, say I noticed a footwork thing. I'm going to come in. What happened? Did I actually hit your arm? Okay, well, say I didn't hit Sean's arm, right? I'm going to throw this shot. And you can throw it at different speeds. A lot of the time, the other thing you have to think about is you don't want to be giving... Your opponent's going to be trying to get the same information out of you that you're trying to get out of them. So you don't always want to tell them the whole story, right? So maybe don't throw at full speed, right? Oh, they think you're slower than you are, right? You're trying to purposefully put bad data into their model to where they miscalculate. Okay, so I'll do something like that. I hate you again. Get a better guard. Throwing different shots, right? So what I did there is that I came on the inside, and I wasn't trying to hit Sean's forearm, but I did. And that actually happens a lot in my case, where I'm going for something and I actually hit something I'm not meaning to. So then I now have to change my strategy off of that. But okay, let's say I didn't do this. Okay, Sean's not responding, or this new opponent isn't responding, or isn't riposting off of my attacks. So I can probably throw something relatively aggressive, and I don't have to worry about them capitalizing on me. Or I throw something real hard to get them to throw up. I'm setting up a combo where I can boom across, right? And that was a fake. So I'll do it a little bit slower. Came up, throw. Huh? Throw. Okay? I haven't thrown any fakes into this situation yet, right? So doing one of these. You can also change the tempo, change the different footwork, right? Go in the different location. Seeing how this works. Right. So what happened there? Let's go back. So I stepped in first. Sean didn't do anything. Okay. He pulled down a little bit. So I knew Sean was going for that block. So what I did was I threw up and then I threw out. Right? And I had that combo in mind because, okay, move, respond. Probably going to be the next response. Again, one thing you have to realize is if you throw the same stimuli again and again, eventually it's not going to work. You have to be very conscientious about that. So this is an ever-changing model, and that's kind of what my adaptation class talks about. Okay, so those sort of principles is what I would look for. In single sword, it's a lot about getting your opponent to move their guard, their sword out of their way, and how to capitalize it, using a lot of fakes, and really planning out the attack is really important. Sword and board is a little bit harder in this case, because now I have to deal with this huge piece of surface area. Come this way a little bit. So, as I alluded to earlier, Sean has this dome shield, and I'm not really able to get this shoulder. Let's switch. I'm not really able to get this shoulder. Okay, so that's going to be hard. But, let's see how Sean responds to this shoulder slot. He comes up, even though it's super protected. Boom. Right? If I can predict or get the response of, oh, they're going to move the board up, and I got Sean to expose his hip, easy setup, easy combo, fake, throw. And sometimes I don't even always have to throw that initial fake, is if I can come in, right, I'm getting the same board response, or effectively the same board response, by taking that offline step. Sorry. Boom. Hit the board. Sword and board, I think, overall is one of the harder categories because people work it so much. People are really, really comfortable with sword and board. And so you have to work harder. I'll get you out of the sun. Washing out for the foot forward, what foot is forward, is really important here. Seeing that Sean's board foot is forward, I know that Sean's range of attack isn't as far. This is a really big deal since I know I fought with Sean for a long time. If we just square up, Sean outranges me. But if Sean's board foot is forward, I now outrange him. So Sean is actually he's reducing his strength against me, which is probably not beneficial for him. You're welcome. No. Yep, I've only given you this feedback a while ago. So again, or additionally with this, the foot that is forward is going to be the hip that is the easiest to get. If I want to get that sword side hip, I have to really dig for it. And if I'm going to throw that shot if I want to throw this money, one, it's really easy to block for him. And typically, if we just like rotate, I'm pretty exposed, right? I would have to do something like this, but even my other shoulder is exposed. So if Sean has super good reactivity, with that shot, I could easily be outgamed. So probably not the shot that I want to do, unless I work into it where step, or I mean that was kind of goofy, but step, throw. I mean I ended up getting the sword arm, and all I'm doing there is I'm taking a half step, throwing off, and the half step is to get Sean to rotate over. This isn't going to work for somebody that backs out and likes to play a range game. Since I know Sean is a more stagnant fighter, these sort of little footwork techniques or body jukes are going to work more. Okay, so you're going to have to use your footwork for this. But if I do this and Sean just steps out, I'm not, well, you would most likely want to step that way to stay online. But if I step this way, okay, that's not going to work because Sean is, I've gone nowhere. We are still net zero, right? So now I would have to, if Sean is a more high mobility fighter, I'm going to have to get Sean to come in to capitalize on something, right? So maybe I do this chop shot right here. This is a really good opener against sword and board because look, I'm now blocking their sword from coming down. What they have to do pretty much is they have to come out if they want to go under, right? Or go back into guard. Or you have to go over my sword, right? But if that's the case, and most, like, in my experience, like 80% of fighters are going to go over, high class, boom. Or what I really like to do with this, throw, boom, dark side. If you can figure out in sword and board that people like to throw dark side or like to throw high crosses, instigate that high cross, do a dark side. The dark side is the natural response, right? Because I'm protecting my shoulder, boom, and I get that sword arm. If I'm really good, I can get the torso, okay? So, additionally, let's see, let's talk about body fakes really fast. So with the body fakes, again, people, really what you're going to want to do is you're trying to get them to move the board or throw a shot that exposes their arm, right? So if I go like this, well, that's one really wonky. if that's what happens, right? If I come over and Sean tilts like that, that actually exposes that hip a lot. So, I'm throwing a dark side without instigating a high cross because of how deep Sean turns. Again, Sean should actually be rotating his body with me. Boom. Or stepping out or stepping over. But if this is what your opponent is doing and how they're responding, capitalize on it. If you see the opening, take it. So, last thing, keep in mind a couple of backup plans. And what I really mean by backup plans is know where you're open when you throw a shot or when you do a movement or when you step in, so on and so forth. Right? You need to have a safety plan to make sure that you don't get killed or you don't get tagged. What else? Also, knowing when to disengage is really important. I know a lot of people, when they come up with a strategy, they're like, okay, all right, I'm going to do this. And then they get in the fight, and then they don't know when to back off. If at any point in a fight, you realize, oh, this is a bad place, or you realize you're not able to keep up, back out, reset. Don't play their game, and don't put yourself in a place that you know you can lose. Also, really quick with execution, the way that I typically talk about combat strategy and assessment and execution is I get all this information and I know all this information, and let's say I know I want to do this pump and I'm expecting Sean to, pull his board up, and then I can throw that hip money shot. Let's say that's what I want to do. Okay? When I'm actually initiating it, executing it, I'm not thinking, okay, Sean did it. Okay, now I can do this. Or, Sean didn't do it. What do I do now? No, I'm probably still going to throw the shot, or I make that instantaneous game time decision. I'm not thinking about the plan. I just plan it in my head, and I go for it, and let's see how it goes. If it doesn't work out, let's adjust. Okay? I guess the point that I'm trying to get across here is when you're in the fight, you want to be conscientious about what's happening in the fight, not thinking about, I need to throw this shot. Okay? Because that's going to get you killed. And you have to have confidence in yourself in that, okay, I get this, I don't get this. And realize, okay, you do a plan, you make a plan, you try to execute it, you die. That's not a bad outcome as long as you learn from it, right? Because now that's another piece of data. All right, your opponent didn't respond the way that you thought they were. Refine your model. What was it that they did that you didn't expect? Stuff like that. So that's all I have prepared for this class. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them afterwards. But thank you all for your time and attention, and I'll see you next time on my Newb the Warlord series.